Okay, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. Let me know if not. So thank you for joining us this morning. Today we are going to be focusing on cybersecurity and the risks that this sudden transformation to working from home to remote working is impacting on our businesses, and really just the things to watch out for in this kind of hectic and chaotic time. Sorry, I'm getting used to Zoom, so I have things flashing at me here. So I'll keep going. So we've got three great speakers lined up for you today. What we're going to do is we're going to have each of the speakers speak first. We've got Dave Subley from 7 Elements, we've got Federica Czarski from Quorum Cyber, and Ian McGarren from Barrier Networks. And so after they speak, we'll then do Q&A. So if you have any questions during that time, feel free to submit them on the Q&A function, and then we'll pick them up at the end. If your question is for a particular person, please put in a name. It just means I'm filling a question out to my person. But if it's for anyone, if it's just a general question, that's absolutely fine. We'll fill them out to individuals. And then after that, we'll open the line. So I know there's people on the lines who are, us from cyber companies who may have something they want to add, to expand on points raised in the speakers, or who have offers of support that they want to make. So there will be a chance at the end to speak, not just submit via the QA. So we will come to that at the end as well. Just before we get started, sorry, I totally forgot to say who I am, because not everyone might know me. I'm Ciara Mitchell. I'm head of ScotlandIS Cyber, and I'm the cluster manager for Scotland's cyber cluster. We have been running a number of webinars, ScotlandIS, in terms of the whole wider business transformation. Some of any ones we went so far are recorded and on our website, and with many more scheduled. But we're also running drop-in sessions once a week, coffee kind of drop-in. So there's no agenda. We'll probably vary completely in numbers that join us. It could be one or two of us, could be quite a few. But if people are feeling isolated or just want to chat, maybe questions about ScotlandIS that you haven't had a chance to ask before, that's a perfect opportunity. I'm scheduled for the 8th of April, so wanted to mention it because, again, if people haven't come across me and don't know what a cluster manager is, that's a perfect time to kind of come on, let's have a chat, and I'm quite happy to kind of answer any questions you have in relation to the cyber cluster. So we have those three great speakers on. We also have Heather Donnelly, our head of marketing, on the background, who's going to keep me sane when it comes to Zoom, because this is my first time hosting a call. So Heather's going to help me out in the background. She's also been the power behind all these webinars. So if anyone does have any questions about what ones are coming, we have Heather on who can answer those questions too. So I think that's probably enough for me. Let's get on with it, because we've lots of interesting topics to cover. So I'm going to hand over to Dave Subley first, if that's okay, Dave.
Morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us on this well, rather grey and drab Scottish morning. I'm Dave Subley. Most of you probably, hopefully, know who I am, but for those that don't, I'm the CEO of 7 Elements, and our main focus is on security testing and incident response. So we're doing that independent assurance activity to help organisations maintain a robust posture from a security perspective. So obviously this is quite timely for us in terms of there's going to be massive change within businesses, and therefore change can bring reward and risk, as we know. So I'm going to go through a number of different things that have sort of come to mind from talking internally and with other people about what risks and mitigations could be brought out from COVID and the change to working patterns. But I think the underlying strap to all of this is that we need to balance keeping businesses going and actually making sure the businesses are viable and survive this massive upheaval, with the real risk of actually losing a business that was viable through a cyber attack. Malicious actors are renowned for taking opportunity when it arises to their own gain, and I can't see that will change during this period. And if we're not careful with the changes that we're making to make sure the businesses can actually just keep going, then we could be introducing risk that could be leveraged. So I think we need to be aware of that, but it all needs to be kept in context of first and foremost, we need to keep the lights on with the businesses, and businesses need to be able to deliver what they're doing, and therefore it is correct to make changes and leverage technology correctly, but we need to make sure that at some point we also guard against malicious activity. So today I'm going to walk through very quickly, and I'm hoping that the more interesting part will be Q&A through all of the panelists, and I'm certainly looking forward hearing what Fed and Ian have got to say as well. But I want to quickly touch on vulnerability management, data backup, the changes to the network perimeter that are occurring and we're seeing occur at the moment to try and enable our workforce to deliver what they need to do. Very quickly look at password policy and multi-factor authentication. I just want to touch on that. And then a very brief look at the need for phishing awareness for staff during this period as well. Now, we're seeing already organisations making significant changes to how they do business, and we've seen some great leaps of businesses taking stuff online which they'd never done before to just maintain their ability to deliver the service. But comes with that, we're seeing a lot more remote working. We're seeing adoption of cloud services very rapidly, and I think we're all showing that today with the use of Zoom. You know, we've all jumped on and we're starting to use collaborative platforms very easily. And Zoom is being used to deliver everything from these types of webinars, business meetings, critical business meetings, but also your children's dance classes and story times and fitness classes with celebrities. So, you know, it is being used in lots of different ways. And we've already seen with Zoom yesterday, this discussion about some of the insecurities within it as well. So we're all quick to jump on and use technology to our advantage, but I don't think we always consider that there might be a drawback on some of this. So vulnerability management, I just wanted to highlight that during this period of the next couple of months, when the focus is on lots of different things, that actually patch management and vulnerability management is still going to be a cornerstone of activity that you need to be addressing from a business. We've already seen this week Microsoft discussing a 0-day in the way that Word handles certain fonts that are being used by malicious actors to gain access to endpoints. So there's clearly a need to keep an eye on that. If we don't, there's a serious risk that we'll have a drift, and that drift will mean there are machines, servers and workstations that are vulnerable to opportunistic attack. And I think that certainly opens us up to some significant challenges in terms of ransomware, a type of instance where, you know, a malicious actor gains a foothold on a machine or a server and then using it to then encrypt data within the network. So I think keeping an eye on patching and making sure that we, as far as we can, keep patching our assets and therefore removing that threat surface to malicious actors, we're stopping that opportunistic attack from occurring, which can only be a good thing, because your focus shouldn't be on incidents at the moment. It needs to be on driving the business forward. Microsoft have already said that they're going to start cutting back on the patches that they're releasing, and it's only going to be the security ones that they're and the high severity ones that they're looking at pushing out. So hopefully that cuts the noise down certainly from a consuming what do I need to patch. But something I considered along with that is consider the machines that you've still left on in the office. Do they need to be on? If they're not helping you deliver your core services, actually, is it safer to consider turning them off in the interim so they're not an asset that you need to consider and be concerned with? But secondly, and we'll talk about the changes to network perimeter when we get to that in a minute. As you're adding new services and standing up new technology to deliver your service, you need to make sure that they are in line with patching, and you're not standing up an out-of-date server because it's just a VM and you're spinning it up and it's being exposed to the internet. So make sure that you're keeping on top of all your assets, and anything you introduce to the network is also robustly patched. A challenge at this time is going to be making sure those patches work within your estate. Clearly, a lot of mature approaches have a staged approach where they'll test patches before rollout. It might be a case of that we need to find novel ways of doing that at speed and with reduced headcount, reduced ability, and actually new technology that you don't have test beds for. So we need to consider the impact of just mass patching as well. But one organisation I was talking with, where they have a very good board relationship with vulnerability management, the board understand that they want to patch quickly, and their aim is to patch within a few days of a patch become available, and they'll take the hit if something falls over. So there's a nice mature conversation that's been had there that sometimes something will go wrong with a patch. What's the process for rolling back and recovering? But let's do it that way rather than hold back for several weeks and leave ourselves exposed. And I think that's quite a nice, mature space to be in, but we'll need to consider that and the impact on organisations. Data backup. I think we need to be conscious that certainly from a ransomware attack perspective, they're after your data and encrypting your data. So more robust backup process you have, the ability to recover that data puts you in control of that situation more than being in the position of needing to consider paying a ransom or losing the data entirely. So I think we need to make sure that our backups at this time are robust and they are able to be recovered and they can't be tampered with. So ask the difficult questions to your IT team as where are our backups? Are they logically on the network? Are they actually offsite? If they're offsite, how do you gain access to them? Are they in the cloud? How do you make sure they can't be encrypted because somebody may gain the credentials for that service because of the breach that they've undertaken? But also we need to consider new technology stacks that we're spinning up to support businesses as change. Where's our data now residing? Have we actually fundamentally changed where we put our sensitive data just to make sure we can actually deliver what we're doing on a day-to-day basis? And so one of the key questions I've got in that is that, do any of the changes that we've implemented alter where our sensitive data is held? And I think that's a question we should be asking our business. And it may not be your technical teams that you need to be asking that, because one of your business teams may have got the corporate credit card out and gone and brought a service because they needed it, and they're now putting data somewhere that was never considered before. So you need to ask more than just your technical teams those types of questions, and then get the assurance that that's actually working in your favour. Moving on to changes to the network perimeter. This past few days, we've already seen significant increase in the amount of remote desktop protocol RDP services that are exposed to the internet. So clearly a lot of organizations are standing up servers to allow remote access to the environment and doing that over RDP, but they're not securing those endpoints robustly in terms of only allowing their own workforce to access those endpoints. Those endpoints are open to the internet, and therefore if they haven't secured that the deployment, they are leaving themselves open to potential brute force attacks against credentials, protocol vulnerabilities within RDP, etc., that may allow malicious actors to gain access to the environment. So I think, whilst we understand that organizations will push forward to make sure that access is supported for their workforce and can be maintained, keep an eye on what are you exposing. Can you tie it down to a VPN service where your users are the only users that can gain access to that? Are there other mechanisms you can do to limit exposure of those endpoints? So I'd definitely say it's quite a critical area to keep mindful on. And then brings me on to sort of two areas that come together, which is password policy and MFA, multi-factor authentication. I think if we are standing up new services, a lot of cloud-based services, we need to make sure that the users are adhering to corporate policy on password complexity. NCSC has some great guidance on password formation to make sure that they're actually sensibly complex and they're not just the usual must be 8 characters with uppercase, lowercase, number and an exclamation mark or a hash or such like. So proper robust passwords that do protect an end user, but combining that with the advice which is enable MFA anywhere and everywhere. If you can enable a second factor authentication, do so, because you are cutting down the likelihood of a brute force attack on the environment. And I think that, or with single sign-on, some form of mechanism that allows you to protect those users, will hopefully reduce the exposure to credentials being either reused or stolen or brute forced, and therefore gaining access as that user. So I think that's quite critical at the moment. And so follow the NCSC guidance on that would be super useful. And I think underpinning all of that, and probably the final area I think that we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on at the moment is phishing awareness. We've already seen it. We've seen the COVID malicious emails going out trying to entice you to a link. We're now seeing it through the SMS because the government felt that pushing out a bland text to every single mobile device, which now you can spoof that sender, and you can actually drop into that same channel and update the conversation with the user, and it appears to be coming from a legitimate trusted source. There was one example yesterday of somebody being told that they'd been out of their house 3 times and therefore they had to pay a fine and follow this link to pay the fine. So we're already seeing the phishing attacks that leverage the panic within the nation in terms of COVID. That's going to increase, but I think also we will see organizations where they'll be leveraging the fact that you're using cloud services, so trying to entice you to give away your credentials. I think that can only increase. So I think we need to do the right thing for our users, and that's help them understand those threats, understand what they can do about them. I saw the third sector pushed out a fantastic advisory document earlier this week, which was, here are the current COVID scams that are going around. articulating what they look like. And so you can actually physically see what an attack, and you get to go, oh, I've saw that because I had that in my, and that layering of that knowledge for an end user could be quite powerful. So I think we need to do a lot of calling out these scams as they're seen, and giving people the knowledge to know that they shouldn't be following those links. But more importantly, we need to make sure that we're not unduly draconian on our staff. So if they do click on a link, what's the mechanism for them realizing they've done something wrong and they can raise that without feeling that they're going to be shouted at for doing something wrong? How do we empower them to make sure that they can raise it and know that they're not going to be hung out for it? And then what's the organizational response to seeing that occur? So if it happens with one user, what are you doing to then tell the rest of your users to not follow the same pattern? But more importantly, taking a collective responsibility. If we see it within one business, what are we doing to educate everybody else and our peers in other organizations? Because we should be trying to look after all of us. So it's, it's great that we can look after our own organization in a boundary, but what are we doing to tell other people so we can all avoid the pain? So I think that's probably the core areas I wanted to cover today. Those areas are written out in a little bit more detail, and it's up on our website. So if you go to 7elements.co.uk and go to the resources section, there's a guidance section under resources, and in there you'll find all of this written up as about keeping the show on the road during this period. But if anybody needs that link, they can ping me afterwards as well. But hopefully all good fun, and I'll stick on for the Q&A, and obviously it's now Fed's turn to talk about his side of the life, and I'm going to put myself on mute.
Thanks, Dave. Everybody can hear me? Yeah? Nodding heads? Perfect. Okay, so I'll share a screen. It's spooky that I think we pretty much wrote the same presentation, but I'm sure it'll be fine. Nobody will care. So we're covering a lot of the same topics. The idea of the slide deck that I've written here is very much so that you can use it as a handout. So it won't be my general kind of image-driven thing. It's much more, so you take it away. Quick intro, my name is Federico Charosky. I'm the MD of Quorum Cyber. One of the good things that will come out of this webinar is that we finally get to answer the question that Dave and I are not the same person, because we're both together streaming camera at the same time. So no longer that confusion will exist, which has been good. So for those of you who don't know Quorum Cyber, we do incident response as a blue team and red team. So we are CREST certified pen testers, incident response, and we have a security operations center, particularly around the Microsoft Azure Security Sentinel stack, which is where we kind of play particularly well. The reason that I wanted to be in this webinar in particular is because I want to share, it's a bit of a brain dump of what are the tools, mechanisms, artifacts, or stuff that is available out there, resources that are available out there right now for companies to use to try to be a little bit better, more resilient to the COVID crisis that we're feeling at work, but also the cyber threat that comes with it, right? So Dave alluded to it, and I cannot stress it enough. The threat actors have not gone to sleep and decided to take it easy on us. They're actively escalating the attacks on pretty much across the board. We've seen a massive increase in attacks, exponential, not necessarily linear, from before the crisis to during the crisis. So as people adopt new working practices through this, there's a whole bunch of attack surfaces that are exposed that you didn't have before. So even if you had a mature security approach, you now have a different exposure to the world. And that exposure could ultimately be the weakest link, or is most likely to be the weakest link, because you will not have had the playbooks developed for it. You might not have the monitoring for it. And you might not even know that there's a risk there to begin with. So this pack is aimed at take it away, digest it, and hopefully you get to implement some of these things here. So I've split it into 3 sections. The first one is remote access. For obvious reasons, people have had and have been forced to adopt remote access practices, be it Office 365 native or VPNs or RDP exposed to the internet. They all have different pros and cons. So I'm not here to qualify the which one's better, and we can have that conversation in Q&A if you want to. I've seen a lot of people just put RDP straight out there, and that can be done in a relatively safe way. So regardless of how risky you think the approach is, it's more about what you can do to make it secure. And by make it secure is not just hardening. You really need to focus on how do you monitor its use, and what would you do if you detected something evil happening. So in this case in particular, I wanted to talk about VPNs, So you'll see the where I'm trying to talk about the types of signals and alerts that you would like to be able to monitor. So if you're using Office 365, Office 365 comes with default logging, and then depending on the plans you're in, Azure P2 is probably the best one for you to pull some of that data in, and you'll be able to see things like who's authenticating, who's using what file, what type of access they're having to stuff. These are all important pieces of data that you, at the very least, want to log. So if you don't know what to do with those logs, come ask either of us. Ian can help, David can help, I can help. But at least make sure you have the data so that if something happens, we have source material to use to go and understand what happened to you guys. VPN logs, particularly crucial right now, and you'll see in the resources, I'm calling out the APT41 report that came out from FireEye 24 hours ago. So this is a Chinese state actor that is using 3 vulnerabilities in, I think it was Soho, Citrix, and some other VPN, because I think it was Cisco VPN concentrators, where they're using this opportunity to actually hack their way through every VPN concentrator in the world and get access. And that's because everybody's now really reliant on those VPN concentrators. So patching, as David alluded, has actually been frozen because nobody can patch the gate that they're using to do their work remotely. So it's a really weird catch-22 where you go, if I apply a patch to the firmware of a VPN concentrator, I might bring my entire strategy for remote access down. But at the same time, there's an actor that we know of, and I recommend you go read that is taking advantage of the exploits available in those concentrators. So not easy. Dave has a particularly cool vulnerability scanning app, name of which, Dave, I forget. You want to unmute yourself? And Claris.
Yeah, Claris.
He's done scans before for vulnerabilities in VPN concentrators and embarrassed quite a lot of people, particularly vendors not to be named. But so reach out, say hi, because if you are using VPNs for your remote access, you want to know whether there is an exposure there today. And again, Citrix Cloud, they're hitting a no end. So please make sure that logs for your remote access solution are being captured and monitored somewhere. The types of ideas and things you could develop as use cases, I'm putting in the idea section, right? So whether you have a SIEM, whether you have a SOC, or whether you don't have anything, you can still do a lot of this. None of this is paid, right? You can do all of this for free, and that's the whole point. Look for compromised accounts, look for shared accounts. You want to monitor authentication protocols being used. And the reason for it is there's many times that you have a default path for authentication that you thought of and designed for, but you've forgotten about the ones that you didn't design for that are enabled by default. And we'll talk about legacy authentication in a second as well in the next one. But particularly if you're using multi-factor authentication for protecting your accounts, disabling legacy authentication is essential. Your FTPs, your telnets, your SSHs, everything has to be considered here. You want to monitor all those authentications. Monitor your systems accounts. Your systems accounts are not going to be logging in through your VPN. So some accounts that you would normally accept traffic from in your internal network should never come from remote access. And that's, again, a very easy way to spot compromised accounts that you didn't know about. We all know about monitoring on origins, and a lot of people will have implemented conditional access rules to block anybody authenticating from outside the UK. These prescriptive rules are great, and I recommend you analyze your working patterns to understand where your people are coming from, but also understand the gaps, the differences, the deltas. If I'm connecting from UK, but my UK London, and then I'm connecting from UK, but it's UK Northern Ireland, that's a delta that is not representative of my activity. So what you care about there is not so much where I come from. What you care about is that I come from the same place at every given time. If you're starting to see deltas as where an account appears from, that's another indicator of compromise that you should be tracking. All of that data is made available to you for free, usually by the technologies that you're using. Abnormally long sessions, particularly for VPNs, something you really want to be looking at. Out of hours activity is kind of weird these days because everybody's pulling weird shifts, particularly IT support staff. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be monitoring it because you will have a whole bunch of stuff that you know is not doing it. So you might want to tweak your out of hours activity rules specifically for the changes we're making. And two ones that we've seen caused an incident this week for other customers that I want to talk about. If you've suddenly moved your user groups into allowed user groups for VPN connectivity for Active Directory, make sure your internal accounts and test accounts are not there, because those accounts should not have VPN access to your environment. And if you've just suddenly moved an Active Directory group from allow all these users because all my active users need to be able to log in outside, that's probably not a great idea if you haven't purged the user collections there. So go do that now. And then for anybody using BYOD and enforcing their people to work from home with their own machines, really want to make sure that that's not happening with a spyware brittle Windows 7 machine. Not that it happened this week at all. And also go check the Double Dragon report because it's really good. So the second one is protect your users and identities. And again, we've alluded to this in David's part, and a lot of this will repeat. So I'll try to go through super quickly. But the key thing that I want you to think about here is your perimeter is not your firewalls and your VPNs. Your perimeter is your identities, because it's these identities that are being used to access cloud services and remote services. So you need to think of your identities as your new perimeter. And if you think of it that way, you're already winning, because you're then putting all the controls on that outward facing threat surface that you have, which is your identities. And here you need to think about all your clouds, AWS, Office 365, Azure, Active Directory, but also all the cloud services you're now turning on, like Slack and Teams and Zoom and all the other things that you might be, Dropbox, name your cloud flavor of the month. Multi-factor authentication is not even a joke. So Microsoft tried to pull a report comparing how many breaches that they had in users with multi-factor authentication versus breaches they had on users without multi-factor authentication. They couldn't write the report because there isn't any data on breaches with multi-factor that are led to that are through user account compromise. It just doesn't happen. And for people that say, oh well, but you can still do OTP, SMS spoofing, yes you can. But that's a much more dedicated actor with many more resources that is much more interested in hacking you. We're talking here about protecting the bulk of us. Multi-factor authentication in whatever way is better than none. So please don't go into a kind of intellectual debate as to whether SMS OTP is better than an app. Yes, there's gradings there and we can have that conversation. But any SMS or any MFA is better than none. Disable legacy authentication protocols. This is probably the biggest mistake when implementing MFA. People forget to disable legacy authentication protocols, and this is where people are getting compromised. So you think you have MFA and you're safe, but you're not. So please just check with us. Again, it's a simple rule that you need to change, but it's going to save your day. Run password strength analysis. So you can still dump your passwords for all your users and run a password addiction. You don't know how to do this, contact us. We're happy to do that really quickly for you. This is something that everybody should be doing to make sure we weed out all those passwords that comply with our complexity policies but are still stupid, like password one, name of the month, or name of the company, and this happens more than you think, particularly when you have a managed service provider in IT. No offense, Ian. Ian won't be doing this, but we've noticed a lot that managed service providers are keeping default passwords for their managed services that then they spread through most of their customers with a slight variation. So go run this. Your system accounts are 40% of system accounts we crack are due to simple mistakes like those. Credentials leak service. This is the time you want to start considering how can you find if any of your credentials are out there in the wild. There's many credential leak services to use. There's a lot of black magic here as well. So if you're trying to find somebody to help here, ask us. We don't necessarily all provide the service, so it's not us, but we can advise you which ones look like bogus and which ones actually offer some value here. Focus on user awareness. We talked about this with Dave as well. So make sure that your users are aware of the scams that are out there, but more importantly, that awareness, give them the mechanism to report something that they feel is wrong. If you're doing a lot of awareness, but there's no call to action, and you're still asking them to be the ultimate decision maker as to whether something's good or evil, you've failed, because they shouldn't bear that responsibility. The responsibility they have is to get the spidey senses that something is off and then ask for help. If you haven't given them a simple, easy mechanism to ask for help, you're asking for trouble. Whether it's an Outlook plugin to report the email, or just an inbox that goes phishing at your company.com, or a Slack channel, give them the opportunity to report stuff. Because if you haven't done that, you're missing a trick. Create honey accounts and honey files. Zero cost to this, and it's incredibly powerful. So you can create an administrator account that is not an administrator account, put a simple password in it, and monitor the hell out of it. And the same with files. Put a couple of files across your estate that are called password vaults, key vaults, interesting bank accounts, whatever you want to name it that is interesting, and enable monitoring in it. Active Directory supports all of this by default at zero cost, and it will give you a very early warning sign that somebody's poking around where they shouldn't. And ultimately use the anti-phishing policies, particularly if you're in E3 or E5 for Microsoft 365, you can enable a lot of functionality in emails about impersonation detection, warnings to users when an email looks suspicious. You can tag emails as external or internal. a whole bunch of capabilities there to make email a safer channel for content. Email is intrinsically insecure, but we can try to make it a little bit safer. And again, a good resource there for disabling legacy authentication. So go read that if you haven't done that. This is the last of the 3 slides, and then it's just the final recommendation. So I'll sprint through it. Threat intelligence has been rampant. And these are all open source, again, free initiatives that you should be using. There's a heck of a lot of data that you can correlate out there. So particularly what I'm looking for you to do here is stay up to date. And by stay up to date, I mean, monitor your email usage, monitor your web usage and your proxy logs and firewall logs, and correlate against the sources of threat intelligence. There's a heck of a lot of themes for phishing that we already discussed. World Health Organization, HMRC, medical supplies. All these new themes are being rampantly abused by actors. But there's a lot of risky domains being registered, and there's really good lists of regularly real-time updated lists of the malware domains that people are finding. So in the resources section, you will see that I'm equipping you a couple of things. First of all, I'll talk about the first one, the checkpoint one in a second. The GitHub community that you're seeing there, that's MISP. If you haven't integrated MISP to your environment, it's an open source thread of source of indicators of compromise and threat intelligence. You can use it to correlate against your firewall logs, your proxy logs, your email domains, and you will be able to find any malicious email or browsing that any of your users have done. It's open source, it's free, it doesn't cost you anything to go do that. Same with the Slack, which is the third link there. That's a Slack community that's been created just for the COVID threats that we're seeing. It's got people from all over the world. We're actively sharing and collaborating, and we've just created a threat intelligence feed with all the IOCs that are being collected by all those groups, and OTX, the Alien Bolt, the Open Threat Exchange, has integrated those feeds for us. So again, you can go and register at OTX, the fourth link there, and you'll get a free feed of all the indicators of compromise that we're collecting through this crisis for COVID. So 3 things you can go do now, all open source, all free, all you can correlate against your logs, and they're gonna give you a heck of a lot more protection than just hoping in a prayer. Last one is, you know how Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus ask you to block some extensions. There's a reason for it, right? Nobody needs to be executing a .scr, a screensaver file. It's usually not something you need to do. Likewise, the LNKs, the links, have been distributing payloads that are avoiding every antivirus there, CrowdStrike, Windows Defender, ATP. So there's a great paper, which is the first one there, the checkpoint one, that explains how this works. But go block LNK extensions in your emails right now, because there's no benefit of having that in an email, and they are evading every known detection that we know. So go read about it and make sure you filter it. And ultimately, Yara rules for the win. If you're not using Yara, another open source resource that you can use this intelligence to look for files. So again, all good stuff. Random recommendations, because writing this at 5 a.m. in the morning, I didn't know where to place them in a slide. Hopefully you read through them. Be ready to rekey all your infrastructure like your lead engineer left. So how would you do that if you suddenly feel your keys have been compromised? Go develop a playbook for that and go start finding out how do you do that rekey without exposing yourself to risk. Make sure your legal team and your marketing team and your Zoom instant response room. I cannot tell you how much that's going to save you. Create a WhatsApp group of your entire company now. There's no reason you shouldn't do that. It's free. And that allows you to use the channel for communication if your Active Directory domain has been compromised. Contact your insurance now, because you need your insurance approval to do instant response for it to be covered. If you don't do that through your instant response, through your insurance, it won't cover for you for instant response. So go make sure that they know what you would do in an instant response case. Do it now. There's no reason to wait. Pick up the phone. And last, remediation is not the priority. Containment and understanding are. Don't focus on going back to normal. Understand how it happened, because otherwise you're going to get re-hit again, and then you're really done. This is the last one that David happened this morning at 2:30 in the morning, as he was doing David McKenzie. If you have to do an instant response at 2:30 in the morning, make sure that the light they have there is not a disco light. I'll tell you anecdotes about this one later. That's really it for me. So I'm going to hand over to Ian McGowan. Apologies, I ran over for 1 minute. Ian, this is all yours, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Ferdy. Can you see my screen okay? Kira, can you see I can't see my presentation on my side.
I can see you, Ian. I can't see your slides, so if you have slides.
Let me switch the display.
When you click the share button, you could choose the presentation.
Okay. How's that? Okay. So first of all, thank you to ScotlandIS for putting this on. I think we're kind of in unprecedented times in the kind of cybersecurity industry, and certainly within the kind of local community up here in Scotland. And thank you to Dave and Federico for those two talks previously. Let me just click on. So my name is Ian McGowan. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the managing consultant at Barrier Networks. We're a Scottish-based cybersecurity company. We're a managed service provider and value-added reseller for some of the kind of larger security vendors out there in the industry. We provide managed SOC, managed SIEM, essentially any security component within your organization's infrastructure that requires some kind of operational or kind of expert level operational capability. We try to augment organizations' IT departments essentially by providing that security focus. We do that for SIEM, endpoint, and essentially anything else that you need that assistance with. On the value-added reseller side of things, we do things like firewalls, SSL VPNs, which I'll talk a little bit about later, and we do penetration testing and incident response. So today I'll be talking a little bit about COVID-19's impact on your security operations, and specifically a little bit about secure home working. It's a very wide topic, so I'll cover some of the kind of key points that I see. There is a little bit of duplication between David, Federico, and myself, so you just have to bear with me. And then I'll look at some kind of COVID-19 specific user threats. So a lot of the threats that we're seeing out there are fairly generic, but what we're seeing is a kind of COVID-19 flavor of them to try and entice users to do things that they shouldn't do. In the last fortnight, we've been extremely busy, especially the last week, helping organizations scale out their kind of enterprise class VPN and remote working capability. I think it would be fair to say that a lot of people's business continuity plans didn't factor in such a large scale event, which is understandable. So the past week or so, we've been extremely busy kind of helping there, and especially in the public sector, where we've tried to kind of focus our efforts because we felt it was more important at this time to support public sector, given their involvement in the response. Okay, so excuse me, some quick stats on remote working. I won't walk through all of these, but you can see that most or 81% of breaches are involving compromised credentials. And that's certainly where we see a lot of the impact from incidents that we get involved in. The past 2 weeks, we've covered quite a lot of phishing incidents, and probably about 40 to 50% of them had some kind of COVID-19 element included in them. So it's worthwhile highlighting to our users this specific threat, and that these threat actors are using this kind of malicious means of tricking them into looking at stuff that they shouldn't, or clicking through stuff that they shouldn't. I've included some examples of these types of phishing attacks later on. And we can see here multi-factor authentication. David and Fede both covered that off. I'll talk a little bit about that, but I won't go into it too much. So when we look to enable secure home working, I've really got 4 pillars here that kind of build in the kind of fundamentals of secure home working. So network connectivity, making sure that your user base can connect securely into your enterprise environment or infrastructure. And typically we're seeing that through VPN clients or kind of SSL web VPN. And the past week in particular, we've spent quite a lot of time scaling out organizations' SSL VPN infrastructure and relicensing it for larger user bases, because they typically weren't forecasting to see so many people on the service. Collaboration solutions is extremely important. You know, collaboration solutions like the one we're using now, helping your workforce communicate and stay productive, but also making sure that we kind of facilitate that human contact between our people. Secure remote access kind of falls in with that network connectivity, but that it's a kind of wider piece where we're looking at things like posture assessments and making sure that the devices that connect in to our organizations are compliant with the policies that we stipulate. And then VDI performance enhancements. For a lot of the organizations that we've been working with in the past week or two, it's simply not possible for them to provide compute solutions to allow their user base to work from home. So we've seen kind of VDI solutions being leveraged fairly heavily to enable everyone to have access to some kind of desktop. Now that's really good if you're an enterprise class business, but really if you don't have that kind of infrastructure in place as is, there are some quick wins that you can get as a smaller business, and wanted to kind of key in on some of those now. So email security, I'll cover off more so at the end when I talk a bit about the COVID-19 specific threats. But again, the guys before me have already covered some of that. Secure browsing is an important one. There are probably two main attack vectors that we see being leveraged by attackers. The first one is email. We see that's by far the biggest. The second one is where the endpoints have been compromised because the user has clicked through into websites and ended up with some kind of malware on their machine. So we can help you with that, secure browsing, without having to implement a secure web gateway. Multi-factor authentication is very easy to turn on. Federico covered some of that earlier, but essentially if you can enable multi-factor authentication, and to echo what Fede said, don't get too hung up on whether or not you're using SMS or a hardware token. The main thing is that you implement some kind of MFA at the moment. Stop that credential theft being as effective as we've seen it be in the past. And even if you are using a less secure form of MFA, such as SMS, at least you're putting another roadblock in the attacker's path. And user awareness is really key at the moment, I think, because we're not going to have the timescales to kind of redevelop or redesign our infrastructure to support this type of working. So pushing the kind of intelligence down onto the user, enabling them to be that last line of defense is extremely important, and we can help you with that at Barrier. As I said, email, we're still seeing it as being the #1 attack vector of choice. We're seeing lots of attacks now starting to switch their kind of methodology to focus more on COVID, but I've put in some stats here. It wouldn't be a slide deck without some stats. So 12.5 billion due to business email compromise. Business email compromise is probably where we see the majority of phishing-based attacks now, and identity deception. Phishing is, you know, essentially phishing leaves businesses on the line, but essentially phishing is what we would term your traditional email-based threat, where you have some kind of attachment or URL being included in a fairly generic email. Most of your secure email gateways will help stop that stuff, and some user education will help stop it. Business email compromise is where we see the biggest risk, and the reason for that mainly is through identity deception. I know David has spoken internationally about business email compromise, so we've got some good experience on this call. It's an area that we focus on at Barrier, helping organizations maintain a kind of an awareness of that and make sure that the infrastructure has some kind of way of stopping that. And then lastly, ransomware. We're all familiar with ransomware. We've seen a couple of ransomware attacks in the past fortnight related to COVID-19. Both of them were Word documents that included some malicious attachment or malicious scripts or macros. Okay, so I mentioned identity impersonation and identity deception. Historically, we probably seen most of our email-based attacks coming in through traditional phishing type attacks, where it was URLs or attachments. Nowadays, we're seeing that business email compromise being the focus of the attacker, and that kind of deception type attack. And that deception type attack is typically where they use some kind of friendly name within the email to spoof someone that the recipient might know. But of course, if you can train your users, if you can increase that user awareness to hover over the usernames, they will be able to see, you know, in this instance, that it's a Gmail account. And here are some examples of what we've seen so far. Here is an email pertaining to be some kind of COVID-19 treatment with a malicious PowerPoint included. So this, again, trying to trick the user into open up an attachment with the intention of finding out how they can kind of help themselves or their family. Again, this one here, you can see it's been tagged by the gateway as external when it came in. Again, it's COVID-19 preparation, trying to kind of trick the users into clicking stuff that they shouldn't. So falling back to the kind of first principles of user security awareness is definitely important here to make sure that not only are you helping your users to defend against typical or normal email-based attacks, but bringing that awareness that people will try to play on that fear of COVID or coronavirus. And then I think it was David that mentioned the SMS attacks earlier on. So making your users aware that these types of attacks are not restricted to email and that they will leverage the SMS systems, easily spoofed, very easy to kind of trick a user into clicking something they shouldn't. So bringing that awareness that they shouldn't be clicking links that don't pertain from trusted sources is extremely important. So that kind of sums up the areas that I was covering off. We have a number of free resources that we can help you with in terms of VPN clients, free phishing assessments, multi-factor authentication. Our vendors have essentially offered it for free during this kind of period of troublesome times. So if we can help you with any of that, either reach out direct or reach out to Kira, and she'll be able to kind of facilitate access to some of those free resources. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ian. That's great. Appreciate it. So we'll, and thanks to all the speakers, I should say. That's really fascinating stuff. We'll make sure the slides are sent out after as well, as I realise there's a lot of information on the slides. So we're going to move to Q&A. Now there's been, I know there's been activities on the chat, not so much in the Q&A function. If anyone has questions at this time, if you could raise them in the Q&A, it's easier to kind of quickly find them in among the chat. But I think there was certainly a question from Gordy MacDonald around RDP. So does someone want to take that up for Gordy?
Dave, I think that was aimed at you. I'll mute yourself. Just volunteering you, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You're still muted.
So
you're good now, Dave.
You're good, you're good.
Thank you, Kira. So Gordy, I think you were just wanting a bit more information about a bit more information on RDP. So that's quite a broad question. Are you more interested in how to go around securing it, or what RDP is at a high level? I suppose is the answer on that one.
While we're waiting for Gordy just to post that, or I don't know, Heather, if you can open Gordy's lines. He did also ask another question about how secure is Zoom. Do you want to take that one now while we're waiting just for a bit of clarification on
That's fine. So Zoom, it's probably no worse or better than most collaborative software. You know, everything has weaknesses and strengths, and it's how you deploy and use the technology rather than it being inherently just a bad thing. So there's been some initial research done this week from some security researchers that showed that you could brute force the session identifier, you know, that allows you to log into this Zoom chat. So you could guess the number because it's just it's a random number, and you could brute force that and gain valid ones and jump in on calls. But there's also some other weaknesses that are being looked at in terms of how it does its thing. So I think it's more about choosing how you use the technology and then putting the controls around it appropriately. So if you want to discuss hugely secretive, sensitive information, possibly just a random open Zoom channel is probably not your best approach. But at the same time, we had this a couple of months ago with the other provider whose name
GoToMeeting.
Yeah, GoToMeeting, where you could do the same. You could get onto other people's calls there. So they all have these challenges. They're not designed for uber secure, sensitive conversations. But if you're having just a general chat like this, then actually that's not hugely problematic. There is some undercurrents that people are starting to pull out in terms of you can monitor what people are doing whilst they're on a Zoom call. What resources they're accessing. Are they actually on the focus window? So are they actually paying attention to the conversations? So there's some more sort of subtle, how could it be used by management to sort of control their workforce concerns more so than security concerns at the moment. But again, with all of these technologies, you need to make an informed decision about how you're using them and the information that you are sharing across them. You know, and if we go back all the way back to sort of the BT audio days, when you would send the meeting invite email out that always had the PIN number in the email, and that everybody knew what the PIN number was. And then people were dialing into very secure conversations at a later stage that they weren't invited to. So it hits everybody.
Just to add to that, yeah, there's ways you can use it safely. So putting a password in your link is important, and it's something that we're recommending for any private conversations. And also from an encryption perspective, the comms are encrypted. People were concerned they weren't, and I think there was some rumblings that the free version of Zoom wasn't encrypted. As far as I can see, that's not true. And just do a peek up analysis on your traffic and you'll see it. Everything I've seen go in and out from a Zoom conversation has always been through encryption. So from a privacy perspective, what's your threat model? Are you concerned about China, nation state, compromising your Zoom call? That might be relevant to the risk assumptions. Are you concerned about a random attacker just randomly Zoom bombing, which is the actual term, your Zoom conversation? Well, you can actually mitigate for that quite quickly because you can see everybody else logged into this thing. So run your threat models. Don't freak out and not adopt something that makes your life easier if it's not within your threat model.
Yeah, thanks, Federico. In terms of the RDP question, Ian, I'll come to you for that if that's the case. I think Gordy's looking for general awareness on RDP.
Yeah, sure. So RDP is used by many businesses, you know, to enable that kind of remote working, and especially right now, we've seen a number of them leverage RDP for some fairly rudimentary remote access. I think, you know, number one is just try to reduce your kind of attack surface that's presented to the internet if your users are accessing it remotely. You can do that by implementing access control, either through access control lists on your routers or firewalls, or by putting some kind of VPN service in front of it to increase the authentication measures. In addition to that, you can enable your kind of next-gen firewall or intrusion prevention system to protect against any kind of attacks against RDP, and then just make sure that the server that's hosting your RDP services is kept up to date. So ensuring that you have good, you know, best practice in effect, to make sure that you're not publishing any vulnerabilities that can be exploited, and you have good access control and authentication and authorization in place. And just making sure that you're doing some kind of continuous assessment of any internet-facing services. David's service for vulnerability management is ideal for that continuous assessment of what you're presenting to the internet. So it's all fairly basic stuff, to be honest. It's about just putting in all of the kind of best practice that we're all familiar with, and just making sure that we're diligent with that at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Federico, David, anything to add to that before we move on? For more
well, not to the RDP one, but actually maybe for the next question. So I'll leave it hang in the air unless David has something to add to RDP. But one of the things I'm concerned about is nobody seems to have an exit strategy from the situation we walked ourselves into. So as I'm talking to customers as to, let's assume that in a month, 2 months, your offices are now open again. How do you go back to safe? And also who's been in your office during all that time? Because you might now have implants that you never knew about. So there's a whole level of consideration as to how do you determine your environment, your traditional environment, to still be safe? And are you just assuming that, or do you need to run an assurance exercise on that safety? So we might want to cover exit strategies, but that's probably not your question.
That's fair. Will we move on from RDP unless, David, you've got anything else to add, or think we're okay on that? Okay, that's good. We can come back to exit strategy now if you want. I'm sorry, just keeping an eye on questions coming in. The other thing I wanted to just bring up as well, because there is so much information being sent out to people, and it's trying to find that, as you said, a compromise where we're not getting too paranoid about certain applications. Like I've seen some articles about, you know, we should be wary of Alexa and Siri, you know, recording and listening to our calls. You know, the insider threat at home is your partner listening to calls they shouldn't be. You know, how much is this just unnecessary, you know, overload of, you know, people being too paranoid, and how much of it is actually something that we should be taking seriously? Because I think for businesses, there's so much information, as I say, and trying to really prioritize this without getting too paranoid is quite a difficult line to balance, really.
I think Dave opened with that, which is the priority is to keep businesses open and in trading. Second priority is to keep them as safe as humanly possible. That's it. That everything else is noise at this stage. You need to keep your people safe, and you need to keep the business open. I cannot stress this. I'm already seeing businesses going down. So we might discuss the intrinsic privacy concerns of Alexa, but we're wasting time where people are losing their jobs and businesses are going under. So I would just, again, I bang on this all the time, which is threat modeling. If you do your own threat model and do your own threat assessment, how important is it to your business that Alexa might be listening to a conversation they shouldn't? And if they are, disconnect Alexa. But my point is, think about the extinction level events to your business today and worry about those. Everything else at the moment, nah, ignore. That's my
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Sounds good. Right, I'm just sorry. Just checking if there's any other questions. I don't see any other questions come in. So if people do have questions, let us know. We're more than happy to open the lines now if people prefer to speak as well. If you did want to raise a question rather than text, I think there's a hand function. Is that right, Heather? That you basically raise your hand and then we unmute your line. So while we're waiting to see if there are any other questions, then do you want to come back to the exit strategy, Federica? Do you want to kind of cover that in a bit more detail?
Well, I guess it's more of an invitation, and if anybody has designed this correctly, I mean, raise your hands and talk, because I'd be interested to see what your approach has been. This is a normal situation and instant response, right? One of the things that you have to really focus on is not just the containment and eradication of the threat, but it's actually how do you go back to safe, and what's your assessment process for monitoring? Usually you have a period of extended or increased monitoring post you think everything's back to normal, because you just don't know, right? And so you will develop a strategy around, well, we will monitor these hosts a little bit better for the next couple of weeks, and we will monitor the network a little bit better for the next couple of weeks, and then we'll go back to normal. And I don't think we've ever done that at scale for the physical transformation that we just done. Everybody went from working at an office, or most of us working in an office, to working from new technologies at home. We will eventually go back to some new normal, which is a mixed and hybrid of the two. And I would hate it if actually the compromises happen at that stage, because we didn't think about what the risks of going back to potentially compromised infrastructure, or what are we leaving turned on of what we approached as a tactical, and we forget about it. So I just, overall, my biggest fear for day 2 is how the hell do we go back to normal, and how do we do that safely? And do we have a playbook for that?
Yeah, and I suspect a lot of companies aren't even ready to think about that yet, because they're still trying to get their heads around how we adjust to the new norm. But you're right, when that time comes, we need to make sure we're not just overnight all back in the office and without having done a proper check of any new interesting devices that suddenly appeared on our office floors. But yeah, if anyone's writing any blogs or looking at that as an extra strategy, that would be great. Let us know. We're happy to post them on the ScotlandIS website. But as I say, I think this week and next week people are still adjusting to just trying to keep the businesses continuing. Hi Dave, yeah, sorry.
So just following up on that, I think being in advance and maybe trying to gain some control would be keeping some form of asset register as to what technology you are purchasing and implementing across the business. So you've got something you can go back and reference, because it's quite hard 6 months down the line to get everyone to sort of bring out their dirty washing and say, oh, what were you using? So if you can get people telling you as they're adopting it, you can gain some form of oversight. And part of that is, asset inventory almost of what is it you've got, what services have you bought, who's used a corporate credit card to go and sign up to a recurring service, because actually, even if you stop using that service, the chances are somebody will probably forget to remove the financial payment angle. So you're then just bleeding money out when it's completely unnecessary. So I think getting control of that as early as you can, and actually just going through corporate credit cards and seeing what people are purchasing will be really useful.
I think I feel a collaboration paper here going where maybe Bar 7 and Q can actually bundle together to put together a playbook for go back to safe. That could be a useful resource at some point.
Yeah.
I think we've got Keith McDevitt who's going to come on there as well. Are you going to say a few words for us?
Yeah, good morning. All very interesting stuff and very interesting times. Very quickly, just to say a couple of things. Obviously, nothing's normal at this stage, but we're very alive to the fact that the risks are increasing, and criminal enterprises are obviously taking advantage of the great disruption opportunity that presents them in many, many different ways. So we've had a conversation with Police Scotland in the last couple of days around pulling together essentially a dissemination plan, a communications plan on the scams specifically. Pulling information in from some key sources. In fact, even sort of hiring a tame hacker to keep an eye on from SBRC to keep a finger on the pulse of what's actually coming up. And we're working on a plan that would seek to sort of identify the key issues, probably by themes, and then add some sort of value. Traditionally, as you'll all be aware, the general messages, irrespective of the specific themes that are coming around, but they're generally the same about how you kind of mitigate these. But people are obviously vulnerable at the minute. And you're right, when you see the government sending text with links, I mean, hell, it's open warfare now. But anyway, we're going to use our wide networks to try and distribute and maybe even get a feedback loop going on, so we can push out relevant information without kind of overburdening people, but trying to kind of clear out some of the myths if that's the case, but essentially trying to communicate in a little bit more effective way than we have. So that plan's ongoing. We should have it in place, and you're all part of these networks anyway, because ScotlandIS and SBRC are part of these networks for engaging the business. But we'll seek to engage wider, so there's the general public and how we actually engage the young with sort of different messages there. And also, we're just from an internal point of view, and some of the discussion that's been going on here, I think the fact that we're most staff working from home where that's possible, there are a bunch of risks. You've alluded to some, but actually we've drawn together a sort of general guidance when using things like Zoom and generally working from home, that's been peer reviewed by a couple of our stakeholders, and it's a fairly easy read in the 2-pager, so we'd be happy to distribute that. It's probably one of the things that we'll be pushing out, but common sense stuff, but obviously not all our staff are security aware, but it's practical, realistic stuff, and that's some of the things that we're kind of working on just now as all the rest are fighting the COVID fight at the front.
Great, thanks, Ian. And yeah, sorry, thanks, Keith. And as soon as you send it over, we'll have to send it out to our network through ScotlandIS. And in fact, if anyone's organising any webinars or events, feel free to forward them in, and we'll post them on our website, and we'll make sure people are aware of them. I'm aware there's a number of other security ones starting to happen as well, which is great. I think there's a KPMG one later today. There's a Checkpoint one on Monday, and I think Quorum Cyber and probably everybody are running webinars. So just feed them into us, and we're more than happy to post them on our website. So we have a question here. I'm just reading it. So I'll just read it out. A number of businesses have been using traditional solutions for endpoint security and patching that will only work in LAN. Now everything has changed in a few days, with these businesses now having time to adopt and implement cloud-based solutions. What's your suggestion for them? How do they detect, deploy, and protect now? So I don't know who would like to take that one. Dave, do you want to go for it? I think we just need to unmute you, Dave. There you go. Yeah, you did.
I think I'll take the first part, and then I'm going to hopefully throw a medicine ball at Ian and get him to do to do a bit of it as well. So the detect part, I think a lot of this is going to be about continual vulnerability management. So it's knowing that you have the asset in the first place, and then understanding the IP address that is associated with that, and making sure that your scanning technology is able to have that fed in as an additional asset to scan. So at least if you're scanning those from a vulnerability management perspective, you'll get a report on the exposure that you've got. I think we need to triage this as well. Your biggest exposure is going to be on IP addresses and services that are exposed to the internet in the first case, because they're the ones that any script that's lying around that can be used by a malicious actor can therefore be thrown at, and you're going into the great pool of potential hosts to be targeted. And as we know, most malicious actors work on an opportunistic basis. So if you've got a vulnerability that they happen to be scanning for at that point in time, and they happen to come across that IP address, scan it, find it's vulnerable, and throw an automated attack script at it, then you have a potential exposure there. So I think the first thing for me is understanding what assets you've got, making sure you're then scanning them proactively, and that's at least monthly, because patches are coming out on a monthly patch cycle. But you also may need to consider, if you're aggressively changing your posture, then you may need to scan more regularly to pick up those changes, or at least scans on hosts as they become used by your service. How you then deploy patch solutions to endpoints, that's the fun part that I think hopefully Ian can give some insight to.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So if you have an enterprise class patch management system in place at the moment, fantastic. You know, you're already on that wagon. Unfortunately, not every organisation does. So right now, in this kind of strange period that we found ourselves in, I would say that IT departments should really be looking to enable automatic updates where possible within the OS and within the applications, and to find a way of doing that at scale to the remote workforce. Typically, we would advise against that within large enterprise environments, because if all of your machines are all reaching out to the internet and pulling down your Windows updates on your Patch Tuesday, then it will seriously impact your bandwidth and the services that you present. But yeah, if you don't have an automatic or patch management solution in place at the moment, either look to get one and deploy it, but in the short term, try to get those automatic updates enabled so that you're pushing down those critical software updates to the devices and applications that need them.
That's great. That's great. Thanks, Ian. So I don't see any other questions coming in. Heather, has anyone raised their hand to say they'd like to? No raised hands. Okay. So we will probably start to round up. So unless people have your last chance to post something. But as I say, we will make sure all the slides come out to you. I mean, each of the speakers, I'm sure they'll be more than happy for you to get in touch if you've got specific questions or just want to follow up chat about any particular area. We have recorded this, so it will be on our website. So if there's anything you want to listen back to, you can. And as I said, ScotlandIS, excuse me, I'm running a number of different webinars around the whole business transformation. We're happy to run another one on cybersecurity or data protection if we feel there's areas that haven't yet been covered by other webinars. Just conscious that there is a real flurry of webinars happening now, and at some point people will get on top of this stuff and continue to start to look back at business as usual. So if there are areas you think hasn't quite been covered, let us know. We're happy to set up a webinar, or we can just direct you to a person that can help you with that particular topic as well. Keep an eye out on the ScotlandIS website for our upcoming webinars or for the recordings of the previous ones. I'll just give each of the panelists a chance to say a final word. Is there anything you'd like to say just to kind of wrap up? What's your biggest piece of advice the people can come away with today? I'll go to you first, Federico, if you want. Just because
honestly, yeah, no, I mean, your first screen, yeah, I always point at the person that speaks. No, the reality is, for me, is pretty much stay cool-headed. The worst thing we can do is knee-jerk reactions here. Triage your priorities carefully and reach out to the community, right? So the community has taken, and particularly Scotland, I mean, we need to reinforce here, we're one of the best countries of the world when it comes to bonding together to provide solutions to organizations. Everybody is working 24/7 right now trying to support each other, because we know that if we fall as a community, we all fall. The economy falls apart and we all break. So reach out, stay cool-headed, ask for help. We are all here. Ian, David, everybody else. I see Jay is one of the attendees up in Aberdeen. So everybody is here. Reach out and say hi, and we'll help you triage. But triage is the key for me. Just don't do it all. Do the important stuff.
Perfect. And I think that's a good offer as well. Like, some people will find this really overwhelming, and just having been able to have that conversation with someone who's lived and breathed this and is kind of running these kind of companies is a really invaluable. So thanks for that. And it is a very supportive community. So people should really try and make those contacts, have those virtual coffees, just to keep your stress levels down and your sanity as well at times. So,
I was actually going to mention on that the coffee invitation. Can you distribute an invite for that somewhere? Can you make sure that we all get it so we can all attend those things? Yeah,
absolutely. So we're doing a weekly, but if we kind of focus the 8th of April one kind of more around, let's say around the cyber one, because that's the one I'm hosting. But any of our coffee mornings, come on, absolutely. And if people feel that useful, we could even have a weekly cyber one, half hour, if people have questions that they want to come on to. So just let us know what would help the community in terms of just getting access to that expertise. So great. Sorry, just because of the order of the grid, I'll come to you, David, next, if that's okay, in terms of your final words.
Yeah, and I think keep a pragmatic head on. It's very easy to go tinfoil hat. Everybody's out to get us, and I think if we do the basics and the basics well, we actually do end up with that. It sounds awful, but the 80-20 rule, we will get the majority of the issues resolved with just pragmatic activity. What we really need to be defending against is the opportunistic attack. That is the biggest killer to businesses. It's going to be the ransomware attack or the business email compromise that causes probably the biggest headache over the next period. That to me is probably what we need to make sure that we've got the core controls in place for, which is what we've all discussed today. And I think if we do that, we do it well. echoing on Fed, yes, we've also stood up with the ScotlandIS Hub. We will do a 3 hours instant triage for any Scottish company that has a breach in this next period. The phone number's on our website. Call us. We will discuss it through. And the idea of that is giving pragmatic advice as to how do you position the response to that incident? What are your options? So you don't knee-jerk and unnecessarily spend money recovering a situation where actually if you took certain steps, you may not need that spend, or you may actually spend it more wisely, but with the idea of getting a business back up and running as quickly as possible. But that's where, in the background, the likes of ourselves and Fed and Ian and others are collaborating and discussing these things, and I think that's wonderful. That, as I said, and we do keep coming back to this, on the Scottish ecosystem being unique within the UK. We do collaborate, even though we're commercial companies in our own rights. There is so much cross collaboration in the background that people don't see, which I think puts us on a really strong footing, and let's see that continue over the next couple of months. But what I'm more importantly focused on, and it's not the coffee mornings, I'm upset that none of us got an invite to the ScotlandIS dance off yesterday.
I didn't even get it right. Don't feel
that needs to be resolved, because that's just not collaborative at all, and I'm not happy with that.
Yes, no, it looks a lot of fun. It did look a lot of fun, and there's no harm having a bit of fun during the week. It's kind of hard. You kind of miss that when you're not in the office, just a whole networking, the banter. So anyway, we can bring fun in where ScotlandIS are here to help. But yeah, it looked a lot of fun. The pictures were hilarious. So Ian, I'll come to you now if that's okay, just in terms of your final words.
Yeah, sure. So I think the past couple of weeks, what we've seen is organisations' business continuity plans not being ready for the scale of the impact. So we've seen organisations adopt remote working in a way that they probably haven't been prepared to do so. And I think the risk of that, or the risk that's materialising out of that, is that their security posture has been weakened because they now have users browsing from devices that aren't built into their kind of enterprise architecture. So they're not benefiting from, secure web gateway or secure email, etc. So I think the thing that I would say is probably most important right now is that we communicate to the users, and we keep communicating to the users about the risks of clicking on links that they don't believe, or they think might be risky, and they keep a keen eye on their emails and make sure that they're not clicking any phishing emails or kind of business email clicking into any business email compromise attacks. And I think from a kind of IT or cybersecurity side of things, I think we need to make sure we share what we're seeing with the community, so that can be distributed amongst everyone else, and make our user base aware of the types of attack that I showed at the end of my presentation. Yeah,
no, that's brilliant. Thanks, Ian. And yeah, I do think that we do have a very strong community in Scotland in cybersecurity in particular. And we're also conscious that there's, I think it's 90% of our businesses in Scotland are SMEs, and they're the ones who, especially the smaller ones, are the ones most in danger of this whole impact, just strengthening the business, whether it's not being able to continue offering the services they do today, or that they get caught out in one of these phishing emails just because they're so busy trying to continue with the business that they haven't time to stay on top of this. So anything we can do as a community to help these companies is amazing. So we just need the companies to kind of reach out if they are needing help and needing support. And we do have the hub that Dave mentioned. ScotlandIS have put together with a number of our partners to try and have a single source of information, of offers of support, of things of companies can reach out to and gain benefit from. So do look at that if there is still extra services or features or support that you feel you need as a company, or reach out to any of our panelists or to myself and Heather, and we can connect you to the right people as well. So I just wanted to check, is there any final Q&A? Oh, there's one more question here. Sorry, guys. If self-employed and working from home, businesses should change default passwords on home route is basic advice. Yes, Corey, yes, absolutely, totally agree. I think, yeah, and I think David mentioned about NCSC having some really good collateral on passwords as well. We're kind of moving on from that having, those eight characters with a bit of a mix. It's more about passphrases, and something that's harder and harder for the computers and the criminals to decode. But absolutely, we can start passing out a lot of that information as well. NCSC have a great source of information. I believe they're putting together something on the coronavirus in terms of the phishing as well. So certainly worth keeping an eye on their website as well. I think, unless there's anyone putting their hand up, Heather, is there any? No, okay, we're all good. So I'm not going to drag this out any further. I just want to say a big thank you for all your time, and especially thanks to the speakers. That was really, really interesting. Certainly a few things I need to go away and look into from ScotlandIS' side that I possibly hadn't been considering. So thank you for the warning, the heads up. But yeah, hopefully people enjoyed it. I'm happy to take any feedback, just get in touch, and hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday. And we'll speak to you all soon. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.